Looks like we are right at 4 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started with our next presentation. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in on our second Quarantine Virtual Insights Conference. My name is Erica Clancy. I'm Project Manager at Excellent Research. Our next presenter is John Smythe. He's going to be talking to us about engaging respondents via email. He's the Senior Customer Insights Manager at Amazon. So John, we're really excited to hear your presentation today. Before we get started, just want to go over our ground rules really quick in case you haven't heard them yet. Please just remember that we're at the mercy of our technology, so there may be some technical difficulties, so just bear with us, but we are recording all these sessions and we'll be posting them and sharing them afterwards with everyone, so you won't miss out on anything. Just remember to keep that comment section professional and respect each other. And remember that this is a conference, so take advantage of the networking opportunity here. Post about what you're hearing on Twitter and LinkedIn with the hashtag QVIC2020. And feel free to connect with each other and just shout people out if you're hearing something that you like. Definitely feel free to post comments in that section or questions in that section so we can hit them in the question and answer after the presentation. And with that, John, you can go ahead. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share yours and take it away.
Right on. Thanks. I'm not super Zoom friendly, so I'll do my best here.
No worries.
So first of all, thanks to Erica for the introduction. Thanks to Bill for the invitation to participate in today's conference. I'm going to talk today about, let me see if I can move these things around so I don't have them in my face here. There we go. Cool. I'm going to talk today about strategies for how to engage respondents for surveys via email, but a lot of this is based on standard marketing philosophy. So it could have applicability to folks who maybe aren't doing email surveys, and hopefully you find some use in what today's talk covers. I looked at the chat room and I didn't recognize too many names. So in case you guys aren't familiar with me, my name is John Smythe. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. Thank you, Erica, for pronouncing my name Smythe, often mispronounced as Smith, but that's okay. Erica got it totally right. I work at Amazon today. I've been there a couple of years. I'm part of the Amazon Insights team. And what we do is we offer full service, basically customer insights studies to vendors in our program. And the reason I'm talking today about email engagement is that I'm an email outbound bar raiser at Amazon. And what that means is that I've been sort of selected for my ability to have better than average performance on my email campaigns. I contact millions of people a year. I get hundreds of thousands of people a year responding to the surveys in our program. And our campaigns typically do about better than 50% better than average for campaigns other than ours. And we compete with marketing campaigns, for instance, where coupons are given out and things like that. So, to have a survey program that can outperform a marketing campaign where you're getting buy one, get one type offers is considered to be pretty unusual in Amazon. We also have a subscription panel where our rates of performance are even higher, notably higher than our marketing campaigns. So what I'm going to share today are some of the ways that I think about engaging respondents, making sure that we keep them enrolled in our program, and then we don't have any problems for the Amazon customer in general. So the first thing we're going to talk about is it appropriate to engage by email? And we'll have basically 4 things to think about in each of these modules. Next thing is sort of like a how-to of how to engage, and that's the sort of name of this talk. Then we'll talk about how to survey and what to know about that. And then there's a special part of our program that's micro-targeting that may or may not apply to everyone out there, depending on how close you can get to your customer behaviors. But we'll touch on that at the end, and that's kind of a secret sauce as well. So to start, there's really 4 things you want to think about if you want to engage a potential respondent by email for a survey or a study. First, you want to consider the context. Then you want to consider the content. Then you want to consider who your target is, and then you want to really think about what you're going to get out of it, right? And if we start by thinking of context, the first thing you need to ask yourself is it really the right time to survey somebody? And so that's particularly relevant with the sort of quote unquote uncertain times that we're facing now. But it's really not just about, are we under sort of like an isolation or quarantine? It's really more about, is the respondent in the right state of mind to respond to your question. So if you're doing like a net promoter score survey, for instance, you want the response to have had some interaction with your product. You wouldn't want to ask them the day they bought it if they would recommend it to someone else. It's just the wrong timing. Likewise, if you're looking for people who had just gotten married, if their wedding registry was appropriate, and they're on their honeymoon, probably not the right time to engage. If you're looking at people who maybe saw a political debate and you're asking them 2 months later how they felt about the candidate's performance in a debate that they saw possibly 2 months ago, probably not the right time to engage. And so before you even go into email with panelists, potential panelists, you have to ask yourself, is it the right time? Next, you have to consider what it is that's happening in their life or in the email channels potentially that you're competing with, right? And so in our case, right, we compete with marketing emails directly, and customers are getting a ton of marketing emails from Amazon. And so we have to have a way to rise above the fray, catch their attention, and really hook them in, and not just consider us spam. But it's not just what you're competing with in email, it's what you're competing with in their life, right? And so if it's like you're trying to get maybe take the example of new moms again, right? You're competing with the fact that they've got this new addition to their household, they've got this baby that they're working, trying to like care for and raise, and it's a new experience for them. And so it might be difficult for you to grab the attention of somebody who has multiple competing interests at mind, and you really need to think about how easy or difficult will it be to get that attention. Touched briefly on the idea of being in the right state of mind, but this is again one of those things where you want to make sure if people are overly excited about something or overly disappointed about something, is that really just a recency effect, or is it something that you believe will be their long-term response to whatever it is that you're trying to ask about? And even in that same context, you have to really ask yourself, is this thing that I want to dive into, is this something that it would be a reasonable mechanism to get the feedback through email, right? You think a lot of times people want to know about customer journey, or they want to know about like an ideal product or a product profile. And these are kind of difficult for people to respond to through a survey that they might receive an invite through email on. And so before you decide, hey, I want to get all this like qualitative research, just make sure that you believe that email is the right channel to do this. Otherwise, you might find yourself disappointed with your response rate. The next thing that's super important is the content that you're trying to discover. First and foremost, email is a channel where anybody could be looking over their shoulder and see what they're looking at. And so you want to make sure that you're going to them with something that they won't mind if somebody caught a glimpse of their email in the invite, right? And so you think, oh, okay, maybe they have unusual political views, or maybe they're using some sort of sensitive personal care product, right? It's okay to engage people on those kinds of topics, but you have to be considerate on how you engage them so that they don't run the risk of potentially being embarrassed by something that they wouldn't want people to know about. A classic example might be like a smoking cessation product or something like that, where people might be trying to quit. They don't want people to know that they smoke. And if somebody saw, hey, you're taking smoking cessation, that might be inappropriate. So always think about if it's the right thing to put into email, and think about how you would do it. The next thing that's super, super critical is that the person has to, the potential respondent has to really quickly understand what it is you're looking for from a very short amount of information, and assess if they want to give you feedback, right? If you bury it into a lot of terms, you have a lot of legalese in there, if you make it sort of unclear what your intentions are, the respondent's just going to look at that. They're not going to read it. They're going to just move on. You've got maybe 10 seconds to catch their attention and really get them to do a survey for you. And what that requires is that you have to have a singular focus on your research objective, right? You don't want to spend a lot of time talking about things that aren't really going to absolutely pair in on what it is you're trying to achieve in your research that day. And to be successful at that, it's actually extremely important that you're talking to people at the right level. When I talk to people, people often say I talk in a professorial way. It's almost, it's not quite condescending, but it's kind of like, I'm like I'm like opining a lot, and to do that in an email would probably not be effective, right? Because most people don't want to talk to a professor, right? They want to talk to somebody at the bar or at the park or at church or wherever it is. And so you always want to make sure that the language that you're engaging potential respondents with is something that they can relate to, that resonates with them, and it feels good to them. It makes them want to engage with you. And talking about engaging with you, the single most important thing I believe in how you engage with your respondents is how you screen them in, right? A lot of classic market research will be based on demographics, and for good reason, because you're looking for these large swaths of populations that you believe have similar behavioral patterns. But we're getting into a point with technology and the ability to sort of database actual behaviors, that there are some instances where a behavior-based recruiting model could be more effective. To give you an example, right? It's possible that I like using, I don't, but we'll just say that I like using moisturizer and I like using a brand that's for a female, right? Typically for a female. If that was true, do you really care that I'm not your target demographic if I'm actually buying your product? Now, of course, you don't want to overweight your sample, but this is something you would have to think of as a researcher. Is it really just about demographics anymore, or is it about behavior? And if it is about behavior or demographics, how can you prove to yourself that you don't just have a professional panelist joining your survey for some kind of incentive, right? If you have behavior-based modeling and you have a database of how people have performed a particular behavior, you're pretty safe to assume that the behavior has been executed as you want. But even then, you still probably want to nest a couple questions into your surveys to ensure. Another thing to remember about email sort of invites is that the typical screening mechanism of calling somebody in a in like a mall intercept or calling them on a phone line to see if they might qualify for a study. People don't get super frustrated if they don't get taken into the study, because they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, we're looking for different people. And they're like, oh, that's too bad, they walk on. If you take somebody to a survey tool and you ask them like 18 screener questions and then you kick them out, I will tell you from experience, they are not happy, right? And so if you've managed to get somebody into your survey, you got to do everything you can to get viable information out of them, something you can use. But you do have to validate that they are who they say they are, and that they can give you the information you're looking for. Also, when you're targeting, you have to think about your research objectives. Are you looking for statistical significance, which could be achieved at a very low number of people if the difference between your variables is very large? Or are you looking for or it could take a huge number of people if the difference is very slight? Or are you looking for data stability, which in most cases on a 5-point scale, if you get to about 100, 200 people, if you double the population, you're not going to see that big a difference. A lot of folks get tied up on statistical stability for good reason. They're going for claim support. But in a lot of like marketing contexts, people are really looking for like plateaus of opportunity. And all this stuff is sort of an extrapolation to a larger population. And in that sense, statistics are very, very powerful, but they can overcomplicate your sampling requirements to the point where you may be unable to get enough people engaged via email to meet your statistical requirements. So you really have to think about what is the actual number of people you're looking for. And then within that context, email is, as we know from polling, for instance, political polling, they often talk about how like cell phones over-index on the younger generations and landlines over-index on the older generations. And so they create these models to weight the different populations that they're able to sample in their surveys. Email is going to have the same issues, right? It's not everybody uses email at the same rates. Everybody responds to email at the same rates. There are definitely differences. They're going to depend upon the industry you're in, the topic you're going after, the behavior or demographic that you're going after. But you need to really kind of track that initially until you have a good understanding of your population, at which point you can sort of assess if you need to balance or reweight your data. And talking about reweighting your data, you also want to consider if you're looking at a product, good, or service that is a use or an occasion-based product, you have to ask yourself, should I be overweighting those heavy users to be a bigger part of my sample, because they're going to be driving more of my business? I used to work at a different company where we we knew who some of our top sellers of our products were. And so we would actually go to them at a higher frequency because they were responsible for the majority of our business and they were our most important customers. That's not true for every situation. Most times, actually, it's not true. But there are cases where you would want to overweight the heavy users of your product, good, or service. And you have to consider that. And can you access them easily via email, or are you going to be getting the people who really aren't representative of those people? If that's the case, if you can't get the people who are like the high frequency users, maybe email's not the right channel. The other thing that you really want to think about when you're thinking about email is, we talked about how many responses you need, but what are your response rates, right? If I'm sending this to 1,000 people, how many people are going to respond reasonably, and on what time scale are they going to respond, right? Because if you're saying, look, I need 10,000 people, let's just say like a cold call for a sales pitch, right? You're calling somebody and you're saying, hey, I want to try to sell something. Let's say you got a 1% hit rate where somebody will talk to you, right? Well, if you're saying I need 10,000 people for a study, right? Well, you're going to need to contact, what is that, 1,000,000 people to get 10,000 responses. Are you really able to get 10,000 people to respond to your survey? And especially if you think about, I need the data by Monday, right? Well, a lot of people are just going to open up their email and they're going to look at it, and maybe they'll take the survey later. Maybe they're busy right now. Maybe they'll do it next week at work or whatever. If you need responses to come in quickly, you need to remember that you're going to have to enroll at an even higher rate to meet your timeline. So what normally will happen is you'll enroll all these people, and you'll find, hey, I was too aggressive on my timing, or I didn't put enough people in the sample, and you realize I need to go back. And there's two ways you can do that. One is to run additional email campaigns where you would go and you would find new populations of people to contact. And generally that's advisable because it doesn't feel spammy, but the problem is going to be that you might run out. Your well may have run dry. And so you want to make sure you understand if you can run additional email campaigns to contact additional populations. But a lot of people like to send reminders, and reminders are okay in theory, but in practice, what's going to happen is people get a reminder and they're like, look, I didn't want to respond. Why are you asking me again? And then they'll click the opt out button, right? And every business is different, but when somebody opts out of a program and they can never be heard from you again, they block your email or whatever it is, you want to make sure that that doesn't have a negative impact on other financials that matter to your business. So if you're looking at like a subscription community of people and all you're running is like an insights program, okay, it's going to be the health of your panel. But if you're in a company like Amazon, where if somebody opts out of my survey, it's going to impact their likelihood to receive marketing emails from Amazon in general, you need to know what that costs the company, and you need to over-index on ensuring that you don't create a negative customer experience, but a negative business experience. And a lot of folks don't really think about that too much. Next, what we'll talk about is a few things. Really, the title of this talk is inspired by these three terms that I've always told people to have effective marketing campaigns: is to inspire, inform, and motivate. And I throw an extra one on here, the old KISS, right? But what do I mean by these things, right? So to inspire someone, obviously, is to get them really, really excited about an offer or an opportunity. And it all starts in email with the subject line. It's got to be short. It's got to be catchy. You've got maybe, I don't know, 5 to 20 words, depending off their mobile device. Some folks will look at it and they'll just know it's spam right off the bat. You don't want to feel like spam, or if you are going to have a spam format, it's got to be a compelling offer for them to be interested. But a lot of people stop at the subject line and they don't realize there's something that's equally as important as the subject line, and that's what's called the super subject. And if you've never heard of the super subject is the text that comes under your subject line. Sometimes it's below it in Outlook, sometimes in Google or Yahoo News, it's going to be to the right of it. And this is a huge opportunity that most people miss to really drive this inspirational connection with the potential respondent. And so here in this example, you can see the super subject is hello all. That's typical. That's what you expect from somebody who's got a personal relationship with you. This one you see, this is like a really great super subject line. It talks about like this guy's emotional connection to this thing, how this is worth more than it ever has been, how he's emotionally connected to you. I mean, I don't normally read these things if they have this kind of header, but I saw this and I was like, I got to read this email. This sounds like it's going to be great. And of course I read it. And then you have the last example, which is the one that more often than not you'll see where there's nothing, right? And it's not that that's bad to have nothing, but it's a missed opportunity, right? It's better to have nothing than a bad super subject line for sure, right? But if you can think about keeping your super subject line compelling and sort of like engaging, you're going to have more success with people opening the email. And when they open the email, that's how you get to you get them to continue in the process, right? But for them to continue, you need to make sure that they don't open up the email and see this like huge block of text. They're reading like a book, right? Anytime you get these emails where there's a ton of block text in there, it's really difficult to want to continue reading because you're like, this doesn't look like it's for me. And so it's extremely important in these emails that you have this sort of laser-like focus on your goal and why the potential respondent should be interested in what's happening. And in doing that, it's often a good idea to sort of engage them in some way that makes them feel like it's super relevant to them, right? So if I was doing a survey on, let's say I'm doing a survey on pet food, right? I could go in there and I could say, hey, we're looking for folks who love their pets, right? And would be willing to give us feedback on a potential pet food that they might consider buying. Even more, let's say we're looking for folks who love their dogs, right? That's like an inspirational thing. I've built this connection, right? But if I had a database, and I don't, but if I had a database that said that you owned a dog named Baxter, right? I wouldn't want to go in there and be like, tell us what you think Baxter would like, right? I mean, that's just like, that's maybe too personal, right? Like, I don't know you. How do you know this much about me? It's kind of weird, right? So keep it personal but generic. Focus on the things that you think are going to really resonate with people, and you're going to inspire them to read your email. But as soon as they're reading your email, you need to make sure that they understand why it's relevant to them. And if they never get the understanding of why it's relevant to them, they're not really going to connect with the questions that you have or the interest you have in the responses. So it's, again, super important that you're helping them feel singularly important and unique. But at the same time, they need to know that you are also singularly important and unique, and you can help bring their message to the sponsors of the research. If you don't do both of those things, they're just going to feel like it's just, again, kind of like spam. So you're going to go in there and you're going to briefly explain what it is you want to achieve. But it's kind of like that first date, right? You always want to kind of make them really interested in learning more, and you don't want to tell them your life story and everything you know, because that's going to kind of freak them out, and they're going to be like, oh man, if you want to go for more first dates, if you want to go for more people engaging in your research, keep it a little bit, hold a little bit back, right? Don't just tell them everything. Tell them enough to get them involved. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have them able to act. There's this idea that you can get them into the email and you can get them excited, but they can't find how to give you the feedback that they want. So you want to go in there and you want to make it super, super simple for them to connect with you, to give them the feedback that they know you want, that they want to give, right? But if you don't go in there and put like a time-bound element on it, or you make it feel like it's a limited time offer, or it's only for the first however many people who respond, they might deprioritize it, right? So if you go in there and you say, hey, this is open to the first 50 people who contact us, which hopefully you're being honest in that regard, they're going to feel more compelled to try to get in there quickly, or this is going to close on Tuesday, or we're opening it till the end of the weekend. That sense of urgency is also going to be something that really drives people to action upon your request. But beyond that, let me see here. I'm kind of going on here. There we go. Whoops. We talked about making it easy to act. When you're building these things to be simple for the potential respondent to engage, you got to remember that you're going to have a lot of stuff that your lawyers, your legal team, your company, whatever, are going to want you to include. But none of that matters to the potential respondent. None of it, right? All they care about is why you're important, why they're important, and why it's important for them to share their information with you. So if the information that you know you have to include gets in the way of that in any way, try to structure your emails so that it's available if they want to find it, but it's not in the beginning of the email where it's going to make them want to just stop reading. And then talk a little bit about KISS. We all know the old free and KISS, keep it super simple, right? So anytime you put information into these emails, we talked earlier about focus on a singular goal. If it's not focused on the singular goal of getting that person into your study, take it out, right? Anything, even if it's just an extra word, look for like what we like to call at Amazon weasel words that if they weren't in the sentence, you would still have the same message, and it didn't really add anything. It's just a sort of window dressing. But also just things about what your motivation is. If it's relevant to them, put it in there. If your motivation for doing the study is not going to motivate them to take your study, eliminate it, right? And in doing all this stuff, right, I mentioned earlier, I've been sometimes referred to as professorial. You want to talk to people like they would want to talk to you, like I said, at church or at the park or whatever. We as researchers have a tendency to use industry terms. We have a tendency to use legal terms. We have a tendency to use terms that will try to really make it feel like the research is authentic. But in so doing, what happens is you create these like form letters that don't feel natural. And so what I would normally suggest is, like, you take your letter, you have a like Word has a function where you can put it in there and it'll read your letter out loud in a computer's voice. If you can get a computer's voice to sound like a human and not like a robot, you've got yourself a good email. If that computer voice sounds like a robot, you probably need to rework it a little bit. But even better than just having great language is just the visualization of information, right? People don't like big blocks of text, so try to use things that are nice images, use buttons whenever possible, break up the flow of the layout, and just make it really easy for people to engage with your offer, which is really your offer to take their feedback, give it back to the research sponsor, and make their life hopefully better. Now, what does that look like? This is kind of a sample of what, if you were to receive an email, I said we send millions of emails a year for my program. If you're an Amazon customer, you may have seen something that looks like this from us. And you'll notice, first and foremost, what you're going to get is this opportunity to opt in based on if you were inspired by the subject line alone. If you were inspired by the subject line alone, go ahead, click that button. But if you aren't, you need to read a little bit more, right? And as you read a little bit more, you'll get the message. And then there's a bunch of legalese at the bottom. But before I get to the legalese, right, I make sure I give you another chance to opt into the survey. And why are there two chances? Because on a cell phone, you'd need to scroll back to the top, right? On desktop, maybe it shows. But on a cell phone, nope. You're just stuck in a bunch of text. And so to go back to the top and opt in again, or to get past the legalese, it's going to be too much friction. And so you want to have multiple opportunities for them to engage with your offer, making it easy. And really, when you think about what the text of the email looks like, and this is not a real study, so this is nothing confidential, but again, this is an example of what it might look like. There's a very clear reason they're being contacted. There's a very clear statement of what their involvement will be, as well as what they will get out of it. There is this sort of sense of urgency, and it's time bound in this case. And then we just make it very, very easy for them to get involved. And this is a pretty straightforward template that almost anyone could leverage to have an effective email structure. Now, just because you got somebody into your research doesn't mean that you're done, right? You really have to continue the process of understanding how to engage them with your survey itself. And so there are a few things to consider. Usually you need to know what kind of device they're using. You need to know why they agreed to take the survey. You need to know how long your survey could take at the worst possible case. And you need to understand what the user experience is going to be, what they're going to see, and what kind of cognitive burden they're going to have to take, right? And so to start with the device, right, a lot of people don't realize it, but like without thinking about it, but if you think about it, probably half the people are taking surveys on mobile devices, but probably half the researchers are designing surveys for desktop devices. And there's other things too, tablets, are kind of popular. Alexa's been showing up for surveys tools. You really got to think about how people are going to be interacting with your survey. And you really need to know the constraints under which you're going to operate, right? What will display on a mobile screen will display very differently on if it's in landscape or if it's in portrait. Most people hold their cell phones when they're browsing in portrait mode. So what does that mean? You really have to go in there and take the survey yourself on all the devices that you think people might interact with. And so like a good example on mobile of some things you might try to avoid would be things like ranking questions, right? It's very hard to drag and drop boxes with ranking questions. And just cognitively, you never want to rank anything more than 4 items anyway. On mobile, it's going to be especially difficult. But you think about matrix questions, they're super efficient on desktop. They display very poorly on mobile, right? And you think about questions with long horizontal scales, things like NPS or whatever. Very often they'll just show the first 4 buttons of the scale on a 0 to 10 point scale. You're going to over-index on the stuff that displays, and people won't even realize they could have scrolled the screen to the right to get more scale options. And having to do so is kind of a pain, and it creates friction, and it leads people more likely to basically opt out of your surveys. And I talked just for a second about Alexa, and Alexa is definitely this emerging technology. Obviously, I work at Amazon, so obviously, got to have my sort of obligatory Alexa plug. I'm just kidding. They didn't. I'm actually not speaking on behalf of Amazon, but what the thing about Alexa is that also has its boundaries, right? You can do some really cool stuff with Alexa that you can't do in any other way. You can get people in places that they will not survey. Oh, tell me about how your experience is waiting in line at the amusement park. Okay, well, I can do that on Alexa, but you're only going to be able to get 1 or 2 questions in because Alexa times out over time, and it only handles a certain amount of conditional path logic at this point. And so you do not want the experience to be cumbersome. If people are trying to do surveys on Alexa, think of them more like polls, right? Where you can get 1 or 2 key insights out of an individual, and it has to be kind of in rapid succession. Otherwise, you're going to run into some limitations of your device. The next thing to think about is what motivates these people to actually take the survey. It's not always money. It's not always a gift card. It's not always a coupon or a discount. Some people are just like, they love the idea of testing products before they're released to the public. And so they just like that. Or they think it's really fun to see how research is done, and they like to do that. Other people think that, like, to be part of the leading edge of innovation is like this real, like, badge of pride, right? Like, oh man, I remember I was in the testing group for this prototype before it came out. Some people are going to love that, and you won't even need to incent them. But the key for you is understanding what incents people for the category or topic you're testing about. But no matter how you incent them, you have to keep it simple. My wife loves beauty products, and she was invited to do some study for beauty products. And she was about 18 minutes in, and she's like, I love this brand, but this is just ridiculous. And she just dropped out. I don't even know how much longer she had to go, but it was too much. And so she couldn't finish it. She wasn't given what she was looking for, which was this sort of feedback mechanism that her feedback has been taken in, and it will be considered, and she will help build the next generation of products. It was just work, right? And this stuff's really volunteer. Yeah, they might get an incentive, but we're paid to go to work, but we're not paid that well to answer a survey. And so it's important when you do these things is that you try to keep it fun and engaging, right? You make it feel natural, right? It's got to feel like a natural experience, but it's got to feel natural in a way that it just doesn't create this big cognitive burden. And the idea is that when they're done with the survey, right, and they leave, they're going to have to say, that was worth my time, right? Because if like I used to do product testing, and people might love like a like a sandwich, right? But if the bread was oxidized or something, they wouldn't know it when they're eating, but when they're done, right, and they walk away and they're in their car and they're driving home, right, there's going to be this like bitter, like sort of oxidized taste in their mouth, and it's going to be terrible. And that's all they're going to remember. And so they're never going to buy the sandwich again. Same thing with how you survey. Make sure that when you go in there, the last experience they have, they leave on a high note, and that's what they remember. Now, we talk about duration a lot too in my work at Amazon. And for us, the ideal survey length is about 5 to 7 minutes. What we found is less than 5 to 7 minutes, you're not really going to get that much out of the respondent. But more than 7 minutes, and people are going to start to, the open-ended comments after 7 minutes are like, this survey is too long, it's kind of a pain. So do your best to try to aim for 5 to 7 minutes for a survey if you can. If you can't, break it up into smaller surveys. Try to survey more frequently, more often with different populations. And two of the biggest like killers in extending past the 5 to 7 minute mark are the abundant use of open-ended questions, or like other please specify type questions. And also, if you have somebody popping up to go to another window to look at something, and then you expect them to come back to the survey, right? Because what can happen with pop-ups is, I mean, obviously with open-ended, it's just difficult to type on a cell phone, so just use those sparingly. But with a pop-up, what can happen is, unless you have it open into a new window, it might open in the same window, and then they might go back to the survey, and then the survey resets, and they have to start all over, and that's just a terrible experience. You'll never get them back. But even if it opens into a new window, especially on mobile, it's not always super easy to toggle between these windows, and you kind of have to pull things down and slide things over, and it just takes a lot of time, and it's kind of a burden. So think about what you're doing, how it's impacting people for the devices they're on, and kind of talked about this a little bit on ranking, right? Where it's like, it's not that hard to rank 3 or 4 products, but we've had folks ask us to rank 15 things. Like, good luck with that, right? Ranking 15 products or services or anything, features, it's going to be like next to impossible. If you're doing more than ranking of 4 items, like, you probably just do a check all that apply for like what's important, and then take those that they chose and ask them what the most important is. That's probably the best you're going to get out of it. But another thing I see a lot is that people love to change like the scales they're using, or like, oh, this one's going to be a drop down menu, and this is a 5-point agreement scale, and this is a 7-point like extremely, a dislike extremely, and this is like a fill in the blank for a price, and this is, I mean, it's just all over the map. And so ask yourself, right, do I really, if I've been using 5-point scales throughout this survey or 9-point scales throughout this survey, what do I get by changing the scale type, right? Is it something I really need to do? And again, from my experience on mobile devices, I come from product testing, sensory. I know the hedonic scales are like the thing to do there. I've never not been able to get actionable guidance using a 5-point scale that I couldn't get with a 9-point scale. So since so many people in our world today test things on mobile, really ask yourself, do I even need to do anything more than a 5-point scale? Sometimes you do, but just make sure that you really, really need to do it. And another thing that I see a lot in research is, people are sort of being asked questions that are obvious, right? Now, if you're asking that because you need that to like parse them out into another part of the survey later, yeah, go for it. But if you're doing it because you're like, I just want to validate that, like, our last study said this, and I just want to validate that 83% of people do this, like, does it really matter? Like, if you actually believe it is true, or is it something that you thought there was something wrong with the old study? So if it's something that you can look at prior data for, if it's something you can look at data that you've sort of benchmarked against in the past, use the secondary data sources first. Whenever you're doing primary research, just try to understand everything you can about that topic before you send out a questionnaire. And then you'll ask fewer obvious questions in the questionnaire. Last thing to talk about on surveys is the flow. And what I see all the time is like, people will just basically, they have this huge portfolio of questions to ask, and they ask everyone every question in the survey, and they get to be like super long. But if you look at it, it's like, you know what, you probably didn't need to ask this person everything, right? So a good example is like carrying forward of choices, where if you say in one question, like, oh, which of the following do you think is a good idea? Or like, which of the following things have you heard of, right? And they pick the top 3 options and there's 10 options, right? And then in the next question, you would say, oh, well, which of the following do you think you'd be interested in? Like, would you recommend to a friend, right? Well, if they have never heard of it, why would you show them those other 7 options? You should carry forward only those options that make sense for subsequent questions, right? A lot of folks don't use that kind of exclusionary logic. And you really should, because it's going to just shorten the experience. Another thing that's super important to do, and this is something that is maybe more complex, is the use of embedded data. Now, embedded data, what it does is it takes an answer or a piece of information that a respondent gives into the survey and locks it into a table. And then it recalls that data later in the survey to help either make logical decisions on where to go, or to actually carry forward that response into a future question. So like if somebody said other, please specify, for like what's their favorite kind of car, and like they put in, oh, I love Audis, because that wasn't in the list, most people will carry forward the other. But you can actually map that Audi into this embedded data field and carry that forward at a later point if you wanted to use the respondent's words back with them. And when you use the language that a respondent has given you back to them, they feel like it's this, like the survey is really paying attention to them. But what you can also do with embedded data is what I call conditional path logic, which is you can say, all right, I'm gonna take people who've answered these things, and I'm only gonna show them things related to what they said matter to them, right? I'm not gonna ask them questions about things they say don't matter. Like this is a big problem with conjoint, right? Is you're doing conjoint and you believe everything's important to people, but maybe you should just show them in the conjoint things that matter to them. And you could use conditional paths to do that. Another thing, though, that you would say is you'd say, okay, I've got these different blocks, and the respondent liked A, B, and C, so I'm going to ask them about A, B, and C. Well, instead of doing that, because that's going to make the survey super long, you should use these randomization functions that are common in most survey packages, and you should say, all right, this person qualified for A, B, and C. I'm only going to ask them about one of those randomly. And most of them allow you to assign them to that condition with the lowest incidence rate at that point in the survey, right? And so if you go in there and you use a randomizer to assign them only to one condition for which they would qualify, and you assign them always to the one of the lowest incidence rate that is relevant to them, you're going to have a pretty good success rate of filling up your survey with a lower population without making the surveys themselves extremely long and difficult. The last topic I'm going to talk about is microtargeting. And this is something that not everybody can do, but the idea of microtargeting is that you're going to find people who are a very, very specific target and ask them a very, very specific topic, because they're just going to be more likely to respond and give you sort of deeper insights. There's 4 things to think about in microtargeting, and 2 are kind of like related to archery, like you have precision and accuracy, but then you also just want to make sure that what you're doing is going to work for you and your business, and that you're getting sort of non-diagnostic information. If you're gonna micro-target, don't go for diagnostics, go for actionable insights. And so for precision, this is the old idea that like if I were shooting 10 arrows at a tree in front of me and all 10 arrows hit like a stump 3 feet to the left, right? Well, they're all in the same stump, and so they're very precise. And being precise means you're finding a very, very close knit group of people, right? And these people are going to be responsive to a very sort of like targeted set of questions or topics that relate to their interests. There's sometimes the sort of I don't know what we'll call it, like the interest in applying micro targeting to like broad things, but like everybody uses toilet paper, right? Unless they're using bidets. Why would you try to micro target people who use soft toilet paper, right? Everybody wants soft toilet paper. That's not this like unique target. Now, drinking vinegar, it's going to be very hard to find people who do drinking vinegar as like as a product that they will consume. And so make sure that you're going after the right kinds of people for micro targeting, because if you don't go for the right kind of people, you're not going to be effectively, you're going to be wasting your time. You're going to be putting in too much effort. But at the same time, if you're overly restrictive on your micro targeting and you're saying, oh, look, I'm looking for, people who have taken drinking vinegar 10 to 15 times in the past 2 months, right? Your target may become so small that you'll never hit your response rates. So micro targeting is a balance between finding the right topic, finding the right customer or respondent, but not parsing it so tightly that that you can't complete your study. Now, actually, by contrast, if you remember the old archery example, I was aiming for that tree and I hit the tree, but I hit a branch, I hit a root, I hit the trunk. One of it maybe is up in the leaves, but they all hit the tree, right? And so what I've done is I've effectively hit the tree well, and that's accuracy, right? You want precision and accuracy, but accuracy is about sampling from a population in a way that you can extend to model a larger population. And so in micro targeting, there's often going to be the risk that you are not modeling the larger population as a whole, right? Any kind of sampling is good for interpolation, very bad for extrapolation. And so you got to be super, super careful that you've not overly done your micro targeting. And when you've done micro targeting by that same token, right, you want to be very careful about generalizing outward to groups that you haven't sampled, right? If you did a micro targeting for small dog owners of puppies, right, for dog food, you don't want to just go out and be like, oh, well, everybody who has small dog puppies, I can use this for all puppies, right? Big puppy owners might have very different interests in what they're looking for than small puppy owners. So you just have to be really cognizant and intention, like really, really be intentional when you're talking about your results. And then we'll talk a little bit about like the impact of what you're doing, right? When you're trying to get those micro-targeted people in there, you got to remember they're going to be even more so than normal motivated by that topic that you're screening them for, right? And so if you've gone after a micro-target, it's actually super easy to engage them by just highlighting how important that topic is to your research objective. They will feel uniquely qualified to give you that information because they have themselves, their whole life never realized why no one else realized how important this is. And they will want to give you those super deep insights. But at the same time, we saw that your Dotson Dexter just turned 3. Would you like to tell us about his birthday? Like, okay, I'm micro-targeting you because I have special information about you, but don't tell me how much you have because I'm just going to kind of freak out and be like, this is just too creepy. And so try to be effective in that. Another thing to think about is like how you ask the questions of these people. And I always talk about like a cognitive funnel, right? So if I was studying a brand, I would want all my questions about the brand to happen first. And then I would never ask a question about the brand again. Then I would focus only on questions about the category, right, that I care about. And then I would ask specifically maybe questions about a particular SKU or a particular product line, right, in that situation. And so by starting broad and kind of bringing it down into a more precise target, there's less cognitive burden. People kind of feel like the flow is natural. And we always stress, have a natural flow in your surveys. Start broad, go down to specifics. Do not start with specifics and then go back to broad. It's going to just feel weird. Do not kind of toggle between the areas. Also just kind of weird. And then finally, the difference between sort of insights and diagnostics is that, diagnostics help you understand, sort of like the landscape of what's happened. But, that's an experiential thing and it's important, like what got people to like, how do people find your product? Like, oh, that's good diagnostic. But an insight is for like really creating this actionable thing to do next, something that you want to create, build, sell, grow, advertise. When you go to these micro targets, they're going to really help you understand what will motivate them to respond to your future offers. And so don't waste too much time on diagnostics. Focus your time, focus your energy on those things that will drive action, and you're gonna be better off because it's not easy to micro target, and you don't have a lot of chances to do it. And when you run out of that population, if it's micro targeted, you probably got one shot. And if you blow it, there's no going back. So that's it for me. I don't know if there were any questions. I'm not really good at these kinds of things. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I didn't check anything, so I don't know.
That's all right, John. We do have one question.
Sure.
From Charles. He says, for the instances when you may need to go out to multiple samples to reach the objectives of the research, do you use fusion techniques or other things to combine the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, we tend to report everything out monadically as independent baselines, and then we would compare the baseline samples. If maybe I'm misunderstanding his question, but let's say you've got multiple targets, right? And you're saying, oh, okay, I want to look at this population, this population, this population, this population. And then you say, oh, I'm going to weight them in certain ways. Like, you can totally do that. We tend to, because our lawyers actually don't let us drive statistics, because if you use Amazon data to make a claim, that would be a violation of our terms. So we tend to use distributions of our different populations. So we wouldn't typically fuse our samples together as you might in classic market research. Everyone's different, right? And so if you're looking for claim support and things like that, and you have to do a fusion, first of all, just make sure like you can actually understand why the data is being fused, and then also if the fused data set will be actionable.
Great. We have another question from Doug. He says, great presentation. What kinds of questions do you ask that will generate insights versus diagnostics? And can you provide an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, insights and diagnostics, this is like the crux of any kind of questionnaire, right? A diagnostic is like, where did you see an ad for our product, right? Oh, I saw it on a billboard. I saw it on television. I saw it on a radio. But once you have that data, you've just got this distribution, or like, how many times have you bought a product, right? And it's good to know, but it doesn't actually tell you what to do next. Now, an insight type question would be like, which of these online bloggers would you be most likely to listen to if they were to ask you to purchase or try a product, right? And they'd say, oh, YouTube, right? Or whatever, right? Then you'd be like, oh, okay. Well, now maybe in my marketing mix, I might want to over-index on that particular blogger, right? So the diagnostic versus the insight is, does it give me useful information, or does it tell me what to do? And you want to always focus on what to do whenever you can.
Got it. We have another question from Chris. She said, or he, sorry. Given all you've shared about email and messaging in general, is there any room in the remote future for video interviews and focus groups for qualitative insights?
I mean, there's not room in the future. There's room in the present. That stuff definitely can happen right now. A lot of that stuff's going to be contingent upon your legal teams and what they're going to allow you to do. There are a lot of constraints in our organization about sharing personal identifying information, and so we are not allowed, for instance, to send you to ask you to give us your phone number, or to ask us to give you your name, right? Because that's just how Amazon operates. But we are allowed to invite you to a Zoom call and have an online discussion, and you can send that invitation via email. The trick is that we're often playing for scale. So if you're doing 100,000 people a year, 200,000 people a year, those are going to be more difficult. But if you're doing deep dives on individuals for a very specific topic, email can actually be a super effective invitation mechanism. You just need to be super, super clear with your legal department that you're allowed to engage in that channel and in what way. And again, the big tip for us is like, I can't send you, Chris, I can't send you like a note saying, hey, what's your phone number? I'll call you. Like, absolutely not. Could never do that. But I could say, hey, Chris, if you're interested in giving your feedback on a video chat, why don't you call this Chime, or our system's called Chime. Why don't you call this Zoom on Thursday at 2? Totally acceptable, totally available, and super, super important.
Got it. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, but lots of great feedback.
Cool.
And comments, and I know I definitely enjoyed that presentation. Super applicable to what Accelerant's doing, and even just like our email invites for our surveys. I think we'll be going back to this one quite a bit. So if no other questions, we can let you go. Thank you so much, John. That was really a great presentation. Thanks so much for your time and for joining us.
Thanks, Erica, and to everyone who listened, thank you so much and have a great